Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muliwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very happy that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Kay Ibura. She is here to celebrate her middle grade novel, When the World Turned Upside Down. We have a real quick message for any authors that are listening to the show. If you are looking to promote your book as we enter into the holiday season, be sure to check out our November promotion package. This is an absolutely fabulous way to tell thousands and thousands and thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. This package includes commercials on the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. It will include regular posts to our over 50,000 social media followers, and your fantastic book will be celebrated on our nationwide network of electronic pedestrian billboards. That's right. This really is a great value. You can find out all about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the authors, click here button, scroll on down to November promotion package. Joining us right now from New York City, New York. Our guest today is here to celebrate her brand new middle grade novel. It's called When the World Turned Upside Down. Please welcome to the show, Kay Ibura. Kay, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm excited to be talking about the book.
I'm excited to have you here. Some of you might recognize Kay's name. She was one of the contributors to our Juneteenth program, which was very well received, and really, I think it was a great service because it taught a lot of us what Juneteenth is. I don't think a lot of people were really aware of the history.
Yeah, it really is stunning to grow up Black in America, and you're just accustomed to having your culture on the side, and having the mainstream American culture. So everybody has the same vacations, but then you have other things on the side. So it really is stunning to be in this moment, even last year when I think it was the first time where my job gave us off for Juneteenth, and there was more, I think, awareness of it. And it's an odd feeling to be like, oh, so everybody's going to acknowledge this now. But it's great. It's great. It's caused some really great conversations.
Yeah. And really important conversations, too, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as everyone says, well, not everyone, but as I've heard said many times, that Black American history is American history. There's no separation, though that is the way that we have it, just generally in the mainstream, that it's just something on the side. But, our beginnings in this country are the beginnings of this country. Mm-hmm. So there's no way that you can have American history without acknowledging these milestones that happened to impact Black America, because it happened to all of America.
Mm-hmm. And, I gave that episode the title, A Holiday for All of Us, because I really believe it is looked at as a Black holiday, but that's an important moment in our history when all of us as a nation said, no more, slavery is done. This is wrong. We need to put it in our past. We need to give everybody the freedom and promise that our Constitution says everybody's entitled to. We don't all have it yet, but and that's something I think for everybody to celebrate. It's a wonderful milestone for our nation.
Absolutely, it marks the identity of America, right? Mm-hmm. It marks who America decided they were going to be, and I think by celebrating it today as an individual American citizen, you can say what kind of American you want to be today. Because as you were saying, we still don't have all those rights that are written in the Constitution. They're still sort of doled out unequally. And so by being an American of whatever racial background you are and saying this is an important moment, this defines us as Americans, you help to expand that conversation of who we're going to be, because the choices we make every day sort of really embodies, you know, what this country is and what it can be.
Yeah. So tell us what When the World Turned Upside Down is all about. I know a lot of us felt like our world has been turning upside down the last year and a half or so.
It's incredible. Like, you know, just recently watching the Olympics and different footage where they're showing all cities all around the world during 2020 when everyone's physically home. Like, we're still home in many ways, but we're moving around more. But the empty cities, you know, empty cityscapes, empty terrain where you would see humans. I was just thinking about everything that adults went through. We know what we kind of struggled through. And usually if there's a crisis, you know, in many cases, you might do your best to shield the children from the crisis. But in this case, kids couldn't hide from it. No one could hide from it. We all went through this huge thing and are going through this huge thing together. So When the World Turned Upside Down really is about looking at the COVID crisis through the lens of kids. 4 kids in New York living in an apartment building. They were thrown together as kids because that's what happens when you're in an apartment building. You're all the same age. You know, you get a babysitter, you know. And as they're getting older, they may be drifting apart, and then COVID happens. And it's sort of about them and the impact of COVID on their families and their friendship with each other. And I was actually writing this last year during the pandemic, which I don't know why I decided I was going to write about history in the moment, but I did. And I had written the outline and the sample chapters and sent it to the editors when George Floyd was murdered. And I was like, oh, my God, after about a week or so, I was like, I can't write this book without addressing also, you know, social injustice. So the book really goes through, sort of mirrors what we went through last year in 2020.
Yeah.
And of course, after I finished the book, after all that happened, then we had other social issues happening, the violence against Asian people, which had sort of emerged at the beginning of the pandemic, but really emerged even stronger, you know, midway through. And it's just, for me, incredible moment of history where so many voices, I think, came to the fore that we don't usually listen to or we don't necessarily acknowledge. So it's about relationships. The book is about relationships. It's about the family relationships. It's about friendships. And then it's also your relationship to society and a larger community. Who are you going to be, as we were talking about? What kind of citizen, what kind of person are you? And because you're here, what are you going to contribute to the conversation? Yeah.
I think that's a really important point that you make, that we have the ability, we have the ability to make a choice as to who we are going to be. We don't need to be defined by society, by pop culture, by our friends or our parents. We not only do we have the ability to make that choice, it's really the responsibility. We really should be conscious and make a conscious decision as to who we want to be. And that's such an important lesson for us to teach our kids.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating, not to veer too far off the path, but with the Capitol riots in January, they profiled some kids whose parents or a parent participated. And one of the things they commented on was just the difference that they saw in their father, the changes that they saw in their father as he became more and more radicalized, to the point that he even said to them that they were traitors or something. But it less about his politics and more, I was thinking about that relationship. Again, a child, you know, these are children, and in this case, they were teenagers who are watching something happen that they don't quite understand, but they have their own position and they have their own feelings about, you know, the world, about their relationship with their dad, about their loyalty to their family. And this moment in history causes them to have to really kind of reflect and have these transformational conversations with themselves and then decide, well, what am I going to do about this? You know, and I think in one case, a kid actually turned their parent in as being a participant. But it's a huge thing for kids to grapple with. It's huge for us to grapple with, because everything I think that emerged in 2020, it just uncovered so many things that we haven't figured out as adults in society. And now we have these kids grappling with these questions. So I just thought that was such an interesting thing to look at. And then also as adults, for us to really give space for kids to express themselves around these things that we really haven't resolved ourselves.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've talked about here in the show so much is that, I started the show because I firmly believe that the relationship I have with my now adult kids started when they were babies sitting on our laps and we were reading books together and I was asking them questions. And one of the beautiful things about doing that with kids is not only do you have a conversation, but you're empowering kids and letting them know that their opinion matters. When you're saying to your kids, what do you think Mr. Bear is going to do next? And you're hearing that, and even if you have a difference of opinion, you're respecting what they're saying, what their thoughts are. And that can be so helpful, especially at a time like this in history where young people are looking at the world. I mean, I'm almost 100 years old, and I'm trying real hard to change and look at things from different perspectives. It's easier for young people to do it, but it's important for me to sit down and have conversations with, again, now my adult kids and say, well, I don't quite see things the way that you're seeing. I have a little bit more experience. It's informing me different, but I do respect what you're saying. And let's talk about this instead of calling them traitors. I can't imagine ever getting to that point.
Yeah. And I think these kids never imagine their parent getting to that point,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think also for reading, it also gives kids different perspectives. I mean, you mentioned that your kid's perspective, you mentioned your perspective, and then there are the perspectives in the book that neither of you might share, right? Mm-hmm. So I have found myself in the past, not recently, because I'm not as voracious as a reader as I used to be. The modern world's taking me out, but I'm going to get back. But I have found myself thinking about characters, and when I'm in situations and thinking about how they handled a situation, which might be different than even, maybe I don't have people in my life that's like this character, or maybe I don't have access to whatever it is that this character has access to. It kind of expands your understanding of humanity, and it expands your understanding of what's possible. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important things is to be able to see the humanity in other people. And when they're strange or foreign, as we might say, then, we might be quicker to kind of judge someone. But when we can see, oh, this is a human choice and this is another human choice and this is completely different from my choice, but it's still a human choice, it's very powerful in terms of us being able to find common ground and work together in our communities. So I think that's another value that reading brings, is that it shows you humans from a different perspective and making choices that maybe if you read it in a news story or you hear about it, you're like, what is that person doing? And then you read someone's story and you more expand sort of your understanding of why someone might make that choice and what could it mean, for a community. I just saw a Twitter story about a CEO of, I think it's Sallie Mae, who helped drive up, the prices of colleges. And now he's a grandfather and he's paying for his grandchildren's tuition and he's saying it's too high, now that he's walking in those shoes. And it's just so interesting, the decisions that you make from an outside perspective. Like my job as CEO and I'm responsible to drive up money for my shareholders is totally different from your experience as a consumer actually dealing with that issue. And I think when we don't have, tactile experiences, in-person experiences with certain situations, it's much easier to judge them. Mm-hmm. And it's much harder when you kind of have been in it yourself and understand what the parameters are.
Yeah. Tell us some of the characters that we're going to meet in When the World Turned Upside Down.
So there's 4 friends, Shayla, Ben, I, and Liam, and they're all different. And Shayla is more like an activator. She likes to do things. She's builds things with her hands. She's kind of just a live wire, I would say. And I is more introspective. but she's definitely a daredevil in a way that I think the average person from the outside, they just see her as a quiet girl. But she's got the ideas and she's driving them forward that we have to do something. We have to help people. Liam is sensitive. He's dealing with anxiety. But he is also the bedrock in his family. He's got two sisters and he helps his mom with. And he also, once he is safe and stable, he's the one who has more insight. So as the kids go out, and so they actually band together and decide they're going to do something in their building, first to help with COVID and then to address social justice issues. And Liam definitely is someone who helps like move them forward and keep them focused on their tasks. And Ben, he's a character who I struggled with. All of them came out immediately as I decided to write this story. They just sprung up, right? And then Ben, I was just like, I didn't understand him as much as I understood the other kids. And as I wrote, I learned more that he just doesn't like change. He loves his family. He loves his friends. And through all this, as change is occurring, he gets really rigid, really upset about things. And it's not that he's a bad person. He just doesn't like change. Mm-hmm. And so I think the character that you see is all of them are navigating change, but he's the one who's like marking change and mm-hmm. noticing change and seeing what can I do, to restabilize when everything around me is shifting. Yeah. So I think all of them sort of represent different challenges that we've had to deal with in COVID, from health issues to parents working to parents with depression, to loss of income, all of those things that really impacted adults. The kids are seeing it happen in their homes, and they're trying to figure out how to stay balanced when their parents are not quite as balanced as they had been in the past.
Yeah, this has been an interesting time, and it's been interesting to experience the pandemic through the podcast. Because I remember very early on when we're just going to be locked down for 2 weeks. And, so it was kind of we kind of made light of it, and we're going to get through this and it'll be over in a month. And then authors started pitching, I wrote this book to help kids get through COVID. And, I'm thinking to myself, well, I can record you, but I'm not going to publish this for, 4 or 5 weeks. And by then it'll be over and it's
right.
still going to be relevant.
Right.
As I'm speaking with you today here, 16, 18 months after we first went in lockdown, I'm realizing that our kids are going to be dealing with this for a long time. The 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds in our lives have just spent a tenth of their life locked down. Mm. And that's, I think it's really important for us to grasp that. Our kids have spent a significant amount of their life to date under lockdown, under this incredible fear, and it absolutely is going to have an effect. We're going to have to help them process this for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And my daughter she graduated in lockdown, so she didn't have a graduation or a prom. She did her freshman year of college in lockdown. She's going into her second year. And so all of those transitional moments that, we think of, she's having them in a very, very, very different light. And then you add to that the layer of kids who are part of communities that had major social justice moments during this time. If you're part of the Black community, those emotions of what's happening, whether or not the administration at your school knew how to deal with it and knew how to address it. If you're part of an Asian community where you're worried about your grandparents or your parents and maybe they live in another city, you're going to remember your parents being afraid of you leaving the house, It's so interesting. And then now we're having this reckoning with Native American communities around the residential schools mm-hmm. and the deaths that were buried. So I think during this time period, it's the COVID and the lockdown, but also there's so many other conversations that are emerging at this time that kids are having to deal with double trauma. The trauma of like being separated from friends and school and the normalcy of sort of what life is or was for them. And then also if their communities, conversations that have been happening, it's not new conversations, but they're emerging sort of on a national scene, then there's this second layer of trauma that kids are dealing with. And it's just incredible. And it's hard to decide. I mean, I think for every child it's different. I have a friend whose kids at least one of them is neuroatypical. And she said, my kids are shining right now because they don't have to force themselves to fit into sort of this box. And I think, my daughter is actually enjoying a slow ramp up into adulthood because she's like not the one that was ready to just run and, give everything up. So there are, different elements of what's happening. A lot of adults are reporting better mental health, and a lot of adults are sort of deciding not to go back to work because what was happening at work was not healthy for them. And at the same time, we have the people who were struggling with mental health, who for them going to job was part of their coping mechanism because they had a community at work. Just the everyday life of, the people who are losing sort of their mental health supports because they're stuck at home. So there's so many communities that are impacted in so many different layered ways that, like you said, it's something that we're going to be dealing with for a very, very, very long time, and in ways that I'm sure that we probably don't know, and also the class issue too, the people who have lost homes, people who are, hungry, people who, the school decision making throughout the whole process. Here in New York, there was a back and forth because so many kids are fed through school system. So many kids are safe. They're not home because whatever's happening at home. So there's this social element of school that's not just about education. So there was this back and forth about, we kept deciding we're opening the schools, we're closing the schools, we're opening schools, we're closing the schools. And it was not just because New York can't make a decision. It was also because, there's a safety issue with the virus, but then there's a safety issue with the social supports the schools are offering. It's just incredible. Just the layers of society that we've been able to kind of put a lens on because we shut down and we stopped moving,
And lots of questions came up. That same number of kids here in Boston, it was reported that 70% of kids in public schools in Boston depend on the school lunch and the school breakfast, and that's where they get their food. And what are we going to do? And I'm glad that in New York City and Boston, other places around the country, people addressed that and found solutions for that so that kids were fed. But what I want to do is we're moving forward is to sit down and say as a culture, it's not acceptable that 70% of our kids are getting fed in our public schools. It's great that we have it there. It's great that we have that net. But that is way too high a number, and we need to do something about that. 70% of our public school kids hungry and facing food insecurity is unacceptable, and we need to change that.
Yeah, it's like COVID was a huge lens to just magnify these issues that have been existing, but we kind of, I guess, have been slapping a Band-Aid on them,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is so much we can talk about. One of the things, before we go, that I think people would love if they're reading When the World Turned Upside Down, not only meeting the four characters and seeing how they're dealing with the different issues that are coming up, but I think for a lot of the country, getting a look at what it's like to grow up in an apartment building, because that's a whole different way of life that a lot of people in the cities understand, but the people outside the cities have no clue.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's what the editor said. She was like, "What the apartment building is kind of like a character in this book because there's the neighbors, and the neighbors all have different vibes and different perspectives, and you're kind of all thrown together in this structure. So in a way, it's like a microcosm of a neighborhood is what happens in an apartment building. So one of the things that happens is that the kids learn what the super has been doing, and the superintendent, the person who looks after the building, that the normal job is, busy all day long. You have things to do. But then on top of it, there were all the regulations that buildings passed. So in our building, instead of having the lobby doors open, they were locked, and, you had to buzz people in. But the super was cleaning the surfaces constantly. So about 3 times a day, all the elevator buttons were wiped down, the door handles to the trash rooms were wiped down. There were all these additional precautions that he was taking. So there's a moment of aha where, kids are in their bubble. It's just me, 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 me. Okay, mom, dad, brother, sister, me, 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 and it's a moment when they realize what the super has been doing all this time to help keep them safe. and they decide to help him. And it helps them expand their understanding of what's happening in this building and what it means to help your community and stay safe. And it's great to just expand the lens, for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Kate, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about When the World Turned Upside Down.
Sure. You can visit my website, KIbura.com. So it's KIBURA books.com. And I have a section about the book on there, as well as links to my social media. And so it's a great place to learn all about the book.
Awesome. We've had a really eye-opening experience talking about a brand new middle grade novel from our guest. It's called When the World Turned Upside Down. And our guest has been the author, Kate Ibura. Hey, Kate, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. It was great to talk.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, looking back at some of our top moments, speaking to authors celebrating Latin cultures from around the world. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book and you are frustrated at how difficult it is letting people know about your book, we want to help you. We have a number of really fantastic ways that can let the world know about your book. Be a guest on the podcast. It's fun. It's easy. It's free. You can also submit your book to our certified great read panel of parents, educators, and kids. And if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. And with that status comes a number of really powerful tools that can let families know that your book is worthy of their consideration. And in November, we can celebrate your book on our nationwide network of electronic pedestrian billboards, along with tweets and posts to our social media followers, our over 50,000 social media followers, and commercials on the podcast. You can learn all about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to find the information you're looking for. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Kate Ibura. Please be sure to check out When the World Turned Upside Down. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Michael Murphy, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.